Okay, well, thanks to the organizers for putting all this together, and it's been great so far. I think ever since I was a kid, I was trying to solve the problem of what should I do, and this is kind of like what I've come to so far. So it's very, very broad-ranging, like everything under the sun, but hopefully it'll be worth your time. Okay, so let me just introduce this word, plausible fiction. It has 4 rules and 1 mechanism. The rules are that it starts with the present moment, right now, as it is with minimal distortion and all the relevant details. It ends with a good future, or at least an open or an okay future. It's plausible the whole way, so you're not allowed to violate physics or social dynamics, make something up that's crazy. And it's mimetically fit, so it's easy for collaborators to understand and share. And that'll be what I mean by plausible fiction. Those are the rules. And the mechanism is that you collaborate with it by filling gaps. So if I tell some plausible fiction, like whatever, some science fiction-y thing, but it's got some plausible pieces, but there's some gaps in there, you're not sure how to fill them, then you fill them, but you collaborate by filling them. You say, oh, I know how to add some fan fiction to this. You collaborate on that. And it's kind of like a stepping stone analogy. So imagine you need to cross a river to a good future. You say, well, I'm going to put some big, heavy, stable stones in the river, and now the leaps that we have to make are smaller to get there. And then if you see this thing, you're like, oh, that's great, I would love to cross the river there. Then you throw some more stones in there, and eventually the leaps are small enough that we can just cross them. So if correct, so what I was trying to get to is how do self-fulfilling prophecies, how does language work, basically? How does self-fulfilling prophecies work? And so it seems to me just, if it's sufficiently plausible and appealing, then it will happen. Because if it is plausible, the gaps can be filled. And if it's appealing, people will fill the gaps. So it's just a very basic model of like how that could work. And the analogy is that it's kind of, a plausible fiction is an attempt to prove a conjectured theorem. So a good future, like we can get to Mars or we can have world peace, is a conjecture. Can you prove it? Well, I'll give a story of how we're going to get to world peace. First, we're going to do this, 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 this. And if you like my factorization of the conjecture we can get to world peace into these lemmas, and you think that those lemmas are plausible, then you can add to them by filling in those gaps. And eventually, the gaps will be small enough that we can just do the thing. We can actually, one of the gaps will be David moves the water bottle to the right, and then he proves that theorem by just doing it. So that's when the fiction becomes true. But what would we actually write plausible fiction about? Like we could write it about turning this upside down and shaking it or whatever, but like we're not actually going to write that plausible fiction probably. We're going to write plausible fiction about what we care about. And so one thing that's a lot of times I think missing from the intelligence picture is people call it the goals, but I really want to focus on the care. What we care about is what's behind what we do. So the second big piece I'm going to bring in is this word care. So this sentence, care, the technician asked me before, will this talk be full of puns again? And the answer is yes, there's puns all over the place. In particular, the word tens is a big pun there. But so care words, when people say something matters, right? That's a care word. Nothing can matter if you don't care. If something's important, you care. It cannot be important. Some people say all models are wrong, but some are useful. Well, useful is a care word. Nothing can be useful unless you care about something. Whether values or care is more important or more fundamental, I'm not going to argue that, but I think of care as, in this talk, care is what we care about is what matters. So Robert Pirsig wrote a novel called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, where he tries to understand what quality is. He's like trying to tell the students all these techniques for quality essays, and in the end, he realizes that they only can write a quality essay when they care about the subject internally. And Martin Heidegger said that the being of design, the being of like our human existence, is disclosed to us as care. So for Heidegger, just the being of a person is care. So care is a very fundamental word to me. And okay, then there's this tends to, or tends in it. It tends to actualize potential. Like how is a student going to actualize the potential? How are they going to do something? Probably if they care about it, they'll do a better job. So it tends to work, but that's not the meaning of tends I really mean here. I mean that it tends in order to. If you care about something, if you care about a baby, you care about an algorithm, you care about a garden, then you tend to the baby, you tend to the garden, you tend to the algorithm, you listen to it, you stay in touch with it, and as you attend the baby, or as you pay attention to the baby, you kind of, that is how you care. You need to do that in order to care. So you tend to it. And then by actualize, I just mean the actual is what's here and real. Actions speak louder than words. I'm kind of punning on action here. Actualization, self-actualization is like the pinnacle of being all you can be, reaching your potential. So actualize is that one, and then potential is possibility, what could be. So you say, oh, this baby, this genius kid from India, this algorithm, this experience, oh, what is the potential in this moment, or something like that. And so what could be if only? That would be great if only we could have world peace. That's what we care about, the potential. So we all try to recognize potential and then actualize it. So tending to what matters, what can we count on? To count on something means to trust or rely on it. So in this talk, just for some setting of ground rules or something, you can count on the math being accurate. So that part you can count on. And you can count on, or I'm telling you you can, and you can count on there being a bunch of puns, but that the puns are deliberate. So if you see a pun, it's probably a deliberate pun, where either way you read it is supposed to be true. Care tends to actualize potential. And if something is labeled as fiction or a proposal, then it's not. You're not supposed to count on it. You're supposed to ask yourself, is this plausible to you? Math is also reliable. You can count on math. I think that's probably where the word count on comes from. And it provides a consistent accounting system that we can depend on. And I'll go into that. You can account for various things using math. And we'll explore how math might be able to help us structure this problem of actualizing potential. We can also count on what's concrete and present. So I am here, these sounds are happening. The potentiality, what's potential? Can we achieve world peace? Those are subjective. Like I think we can't, I'll go with can achieve world peace in some form, maybe. But do you think so? It's a subjective thing where each honeybee has to decide which flowers have potential and which ones don't. And this is this kind of market thing of deciding, oh, I think this has potential or it doesn't. But actuality is this self-evident, reliable thing. And so, or at least that's the word I'm using the word here. So I propose that plausible fiction can serve as a narrative tool for potential actualization. That plausible fiction might help us explain how things come to be. Like someone says, oh, fiction, there's going to be a workshop. Fiction is going to take place at IPAM, and they start filling in details. But eventually the fiction isn't fiction, it becomes reality. But not only that is how things come to be, but that we could aim for good futures by relying on these sorts of things. So the plan for the talk is that I'll consider Eric Smith's approach to the origins of life in our context, just to say that this is not something that's new, or to try to contextualize it there. Then I'll talk about something I call working language. Then I'll try to propose this way of accounting for potential actualization. I'll question the ethics of plausible fiction, like I can see possible downsides. And then I'll conclude with a summary. And the point is, if you disagree with any of this, then you're trying to figure out what's wrong with it. I'm perfectly happy to hear that also. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe a question on the definition. So there are some random events, right? So I may hope that some coin flips heads, or someone wins election, but I have no control over it.
Yep.
Is it still plausible fiction? If it's
I'm going to flip a head. That's plausible, but it's fiction. I mean, we don't know if it's by fiction. I'm just lightening up on whether it's a plan. It's not necessarily a plan, but it's a possible thing that could happen, that I could flip heads 5 times in a row. It doesn't seem that plausible that I could flip heads 5 trillion times in a row, or even 500. So I really recommend Eric Smith. He's a Santa Fe Institute guy. He's now in Japan, I think. He has a 2007 talk, Inevitable Life, which I was just completely blown away by. It lays out a theory for life's origin. It's a metabolism-first theory rather than a control-first theory. So this RNA world where there's these huge molecules that's in the soup because lightning made gigantic molecules that were able to work with each other, to me seems silly, honestly. I don't understand why people take it seriously. That's very controversial. Most people think there's an RNA world hypothesis, but that's how life began. But Smith gives a metabolism first, that it's all energetic in the beginning. And he calls it a hell theory, meaning it's in the hot depths of the ocean rather than heavens theory. It uses the energy of the deep sea vents rather than the sun. And it's formulated based on the reverse TCA cycle, the citric acid cycle, right. And he says that ecosystems, by fully completing a metabolic cycle, so every organism in an ecosystem does not complete the metabolic cycle, but a whole ecosystem does, only tiny animals called autotrophs do the whole metabolic cycle themselves. The ecosystem is the protagonist here. That is what's really going on, and species are little characters in that ecosystem. And so he likens early life to lightning strikes or hurricanes. So with a lightning strike, there's a potential difference between two charged plates, between the sky and the ground. And the lightning, it actualizes that potential by creating a spark. It says, oh man, there's so much, it would be so great if only these were the same potential. And so it creates a spark when there is enough, when it's plausible to do so, or when it can do so. I'm kind of bringing things in, maybe I shouldn't too much, but like lightning does spark the potential difference, and same with hurricanes. So there's this laminar flow where the heat of the hot ocean and the cold sky, it wants to make them the same temperature, but it takes forever with all the laminar flow. It takes like, things are kind of, is that what they call laminar layers? And so, and it takes forever to kind of get that heat up there. But when there's a hurricane caused by this heat difference, it creates an eye where the heat just shoots up the eye of the hurricane and reduces the potential difference. So the difference would be way more slow if it wasn't for these events. And so he says that early life was another such case. So in this deep sea hydrothermal event, they're emitting CH4 and CO2, which are high energy molecules, and there's an energy emitting reaction that takes the CH4 and CO2 to carbon monoxide and hydrogen, and that life was the simplest chemistry lab that could catalyze that reaction. So he says that's where it starts, and then it kind of just builds up from there. So it's just that the fact that that sort of thing could happen, but that it might take some sort of catalyst to do it, seems very plausible to me as a way that life could start. So from this point of view, what is life? It says that early life contains, kind of encapsulates and orders catalysts in order to perform that reaction. It kind of puts them gives them at the right time so that the reaction happens. And then as it evolves, life is able to perform other energy-emitting reactions, like ants going to see a picnic and like getting the energy out of that picnic, or people going to an oil field or whatever. You see your algorithm or whatever. But in other words, organisms, what are they doing? They're organizing the process of actualizing that potential. So they encapsulate, the organism encapsulates what is needed to actualize that potential. And so how does this fit in with that phrase, care tends to actualize potential? It says that this tending is found way back in the earliest life. It's the orderly application of procedures to bring possibilities to fruition. So it's kind of like program synthesis. It's this little, from Levi's talk, it's like, what do you want to do to like make a thing happen? Well, you kind of you have an orderly application of procedures in order to bring that possibility to fruition. And that's something that you could imagine happening with little tiny, very early life. So from origins to ethics, I think our ancestors have always been carers, and that this origin story says that actualizing potential has always been the goal of life, but it extends all the way to our understanding of care today. So care isn't always benevolent. I'm not using it as a kind of kumbaya, everyone care about each other word. I just, like Mike Tyson cared about like destroying his opponent. He worked hard to knock the person out. A dictator might care a lot about things that we might not like, right? So care is not a benevolent word. It is what you put energy into doing, what potential you see for Germany in the 1930s or whatever. So when you care for a baby, or you care for a garden, or you care for anything, you see potential in that thing, and you think it's important. You find it important. That's a care word. You find it important to actualize that potential. So Hardy saw potential in Ramanujan, and he really worked hard to get Ramanujan all the way from India to England. Using a smartphone as a hammer, as a nail, you want to like hammer in some nails, and you use your smartphone. That feels bad. Why? Because it's a potential misused. And I think that might explain why slavery is wrong. You're using a smartphone as a hammer. That's not what, you're misusing what the potential of that being. So caring is something that we've always had to do. We've always had to actualize potential, and we're still doing it. And we do it in just much more grand ways these days. So accomplishing a task, actualizing some potential might require timing, because if you leave a step too long, it increases the risk of failure. Like if you're cooking or doing surgery or gardening, timing is key. All those people, a surgeon or a cook, they need to attend to what they're at in order to carry out the choreography, in order to carry out the steps in the right order. So early life and ecosystems they attend the thing in order to keep the required entities in attendance. The catalysts are in this capsule, and the catalysts can actualize the potential. And then organisms and ecosystems persist because parts can recombine. So organisms constantly pull in fresh material. So I'm constantly pulling in fresh oxygen, sugar, and calcium at different rates. Oxygen every second or two, whatever. Sugar every day or something. And then we're constantly recombining. So I'm constantly using the fresh oxygen to do some tasks. I'm constantly using the fresh sugar to do some tasks. And that's kind of this ship of Theseus problem, and it's at all time scales. And in ecosystems, this overall metabolic process recombines and recombines into new forms. And so this recombination is a very basic need of life, because the ship of Theseus problem is just always there. And so life has evolved more and more complex processes for, like Stephanie was talking about the RAID architecture for hard drives. We want to be able to mix and match how things recombine things, but still be able to get what we need. So life has evolved more and more complex processes for actualizing more and more potential. And human collectives like this room or this workshop also form, dissolve, recombine. If you find yourself collaborating with anyone here in a week or a month, it's because you saw some potential in that collaboration. This meeting has potential. We dissolve, we recombine, we dissolve, and we're constantly doing that. And so I think plausible fiction is designed to facilitate recombinant collaboration. In other words, we could make plausible fiction, and you could see my plausible fiction, combine to work on it for a while, get the job done, and then disperse. You don't have to stay in a company for all time. Instead of a kind of employment economy or a gig economy, this is kind of a more get a job, like what were those, flash mob economy, like get a job done and done. And so the question is, but the only way it works is this language and narrative. That's the only driver. And the question is, will that work? So that's the next part. So by working language, I think language works in the sense of basic physics. It directs energy. So energy is not work. Work is energy that is directed, right, along a direction. And so if I say pass the salt, you may move 10 to the 25 atoms through space for me of salt shaker. And that has this word, pass the salt, has directed energy. And so if someone says there's a lot of oil underground in Oklahoma, it may inspire a lot of different groups to collaborate to get it. So financiers, engineers, surveyors, safety experts, shippers would all come together and do their own part to fill in the plausible fiction of how can we actually get the oil and get that potential out to people. And this required coordination, whether it's in a person like grabbing a thing of salt and passing it where it needs to go, all those neurons and signals all down the arm and everything else, versus all these financiers and experts, et cetera, those are huge projects that we think of moving the salt as quite easy, but it took a long time to get that set up. And I think that they couldn't happen without some kind of language to guide it.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So on like some of the previous slides, there's the sorts of things that humans are doing, and then there's the sorts of things that are done without any kind of mental action, like in a, like lightning striking the ground and so on. And you're using like the same words to describe those things, and I'm guessing like that's deliberate.
Well, I was saying the connection is at the origin of life in this, in Eric Smith's theory, which is that it was at the very beginning just catalyzing a reaction from methane to hydrogen or whatever, to water. So that in the beginning, life was just another lightning strike. But we've evolved more and more complicated lightning strikes, like getting all the oil out of Oklahoma or something.
So are you saying that, like, some kind of chemical reaction let's say a bunch of people collaborating to get oil out of the ground is the same sort of thing as a kind of chemical reaction?
Is it plausible? I don't know. It seems plausible to me that it could be the same sort of thing. I'm looking for something that could guide that could make sense at all scales. And this is what I've come up with. And it may be wrong because of some subtlety that I'm missing, but I would like to know that subtlety. But yeah, the idea is maybe it's all that we notice potential in the world, but my notion of potential and yours are different. And so we all kind of contribute to this actualizing of potential. But when we can work together, when we say, oh yeah, world peace would be great, you want to do that, and you actually think my proposal is plausible, then we can work together to see if we can get it done. And if we do, we get this payout of world peace. And so we can collaborate together on things when we understand, when we're able to work together to get it done.
So are you saying molecules, when they combine with each other, they care and they have potential?
I'm not trying to say that they care like we do. I mean, I don't know what I'm trying. I'm trying to say that if care is just what the tending that is needed to actualize potential, if that is what care is, it's the tending you do with a baby, or like when you express care, if care is that attendance or tending or attention you pay, then the early life would have been attending the stuff coming out of the deep sea vents and being with it until it got actualized. And so that, if we define care as that tending, then we can say that they cared.
What if it's accidental?
What did you say?
What if it's random, an accident?
Random?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it probably wouldn't be care, but it still could be a tendency. So I don't know. I don't know about random. Yeah, if it's random, maybe it didn't need very much tending or attention. Right. So getting the language set up requires all this evolution and learning. And I feel like it'd be hard to explain in terms of the four forces of gravity, electromagnetism, strong and weak force, like how past the salt gets set up. It feels to me like the wrong kind of metaphysical foundation to understand how potential just keeps getting actualized. So that's not that important. What I really want to say is that there are lots of working languages, not just English. English, I can say pass the salt and it'll work, or there's oil under Oklahoma. But all languages evolve towards expressing intention. So DNA, I'm calling working language. So the ACGT symbols code for cellular chemistry. All the proteins in your body that do everything in your body are a programming language written with 20 amino acids are physical things with 20 amino acids that are coded for by these ACGT symbols. Computer programming languages do a ton of work in the world these days. I forgot to mention that the codon translation, which takes like the 4 to the power 3 is 64, but then there's stop codons, blah, blah, blah. The codon translation that takes the codons, of which are about 60, to the amino acid, which is about 20, I've been told is, and I think it's in Eric Smith's work, is information theoretically optimal to minimize error. So what that means to me is that this codon translation that's behind all of our genetics was actually itself part of an evolutionary process to get error correction, to get the translation system down so that it could do robust work in the world.
Clarification.
Yeah.
That actually way predates Eric, and it's not.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't mean to say that he.
It's,
Yeah.
it's not optimal. It's 1 in a million out of random codes.
It's 1 in a million good.
All these kinds of things. There's massive amounts of work in evolutionary biology, like that particular one, Nigel Goldenfeld, and others just shortly before him, in like the late 20th century, just around the year 2000. There's been a lot of work on how it is you can have evolution of all of these evolutionary mechanisms.
Yeah. So it's information theoretically 1 in a million in terms of how good it is at minimizing destructive error. So programming languages are constantly being refined to foreground intentions. Instead of assembly language or machine code, we are using Excel or something. We're constantly wanting to make whatever people need to do or want to do in the world foregrounded and the most easy to do. So that selection of what program you want is as easy as possible. And so languages are evolving to make them work better for actualizing potential. You don't make them work well for doing random stuff that doesn't make any sense. You want them to be good at actualizing potential in the world. Yes?
I'm trying to see how that plausible fiction that we're talking about fares with just Aristotelian teleology?
Yeah.
Is it kind of the same? Is it a probabilistic version of that?
It's a narrative version of that, I guess.
It's basically, so it's Aristotelian teleology in some
Could be.
sense.
I should talk to you about that. Yeah. 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 I think I'll get there. I think the gaps are the teloses that we can create. Yeah. So expressing ideas in a regulated language, that's what I mean by an account. When your financial accountant, they regulate how you describe the flow of financial resources. That's how you account. Or in trials, judges regulate how people account for their actions. There's a time when you could admit evidence, and if you don't do it in the right way, someone can object, et cetera. So by an account, like we can give a physical account of something, we can give a legal account of something, we can give a social account, we can say things in social language, and they can all be about the same event. So there's lots of different ways of accounting for something. But I'm talking about kind of these regulated ways of accounting, so of talking about something. They help us coordinate and solve larger problems. Because when we misalign our efforts, it causes friction and loss. If I tell you I've got this account, but it's not right, if there's externalities or if I'm hiding something, then it causes friction between us. And so in order to avoid stepping on each other's toes, in order to coordinate, we need to align our activities and tell each other what we're going to do. And so that's why we have these regulated accounts. If we're going to go to Mars or something, we need our accounts to be very highly structured. And so as a collective matures, say a family, they become more systematic in how they give accounts to each other. Like they come up with a kind of special language between siblings or whatever. And so, and the reason is because, yeah, as I said, misunderstanding creates inefficiencies and stuff, whereas systematicity improves the transparency and the speed and reliability. So what are the most systematic and trustworthy languages for accounts? I think mathematics, that's really what it is. So I think of mathematical fields as crystallized accounting systems. Like arithmetic is how you give accounts for the flow of quantities. You say, if I want to say how many sheep I had and how many sheep I will have, I'll use arithmetic. If I want to give an account of the states of elementary particles in quantum mechanics, I might use Hilbert spaces for that account. If I want to account for likelihoods, I might use probability distributions, or if I want to account for relative rates of change, I might use calculus. So in this talk, we're talking about what is a systematic accounting for actualizing potential. We know we do it all the time. We're constantly, it's what we care about. So how would you account for getting that done? In general, when a mathematician, what they do a lot of times is they look at something in the world, they're like, that is a stable phenomenon that I can see, that I want to just have better language for. So they stare at the phenomenon for a long time, and they make up a new accounting system for it. And they do that by carefully tracking the phenomenon, articulating the structure, and systematizing it, finding laws, et cetera. And so in this talk, I'm not saying that I know how to do it mathematically. I'm going to give a kind of proposal that's very weak and is not any kind of final math or anything. But it's the desire, it's what I want, is some kind of systematic accounting for how potential gets actualized. So category theory for me is my language of choice because it's an accounting system for interlocking structures. So mathematical definitions like vector space, you have a set with an operation and another operation and a field and a thing. And so you want to kind of have all these different definitions interlock and mix together in a certain way. And so category theory tracks the layers of structure there and all those connections. So this makes analogies, which are similarities of structure, into formal objects called functors. And so Levier called category theory conceptual mathematics as opposed to quantitative. Not everything has to be a number. You can think about relationships, you can think about changes of structure, et cetera, and you can think conceptually. And that's what category theory makes easier. So again, I do not have a categorical account of plausible of potential actualization. Everything in this part, connecting it, is plausible fiction. I think it may be possible. I would like to get there, but I do not have the gaps filled. So can plausible fiction work? I just want to take stock of some key words about where we've been and then get to where we've been. So what is plausible fiction? It has 4 rules. It starts now, it ends well, it's plausible the whole way, and people can share it. And it works by filling in gaps. Care is what actualizes potential by tending to things. Life is that carers notice and actualize potential. That's what we do. So if you think this is boring, this talk, you're not paying attention right now. But if you're paying attention, maybe because you think there's potential. And that is always how it will be, and it's not a problem. If someone doesn't care, they just don't care. They don't see the potential there. So recombinant collaboration is that parts can join, labor together, collaborate, and then separate and go their separate ways. And I kind of imagine that's where the future economy is going. Working language is that language, whether it's ACGT, amino acids, or English or Rust, these coordinate activity. And that mathematics is a crystallized, highly regulated accounting system, and that those can get us to Mars and things like that. So in terms of where we're going, what we care about is a good, or at least an open future that is not closed down in some kind of 1984 type style, that things are still open. That's what a future should be. And we want to know if plausible fiction can help us get us there. That's what this talk is about. Can plausible fiction help us get to a good future? Let me just, yeah, go ahead.
What does ends well mean?
What do you say?
Ends well?
Ends well? For the author. The author thinks that this Germany would be a great Germany. It doesn't mean that we think it ends well. It means that the person who authors a plausible fiction thinks that this is a great, if we could just get all the oil out of Oklahoma, that would be a great future.
So there is no dystopian plausible fiction?
The person writing it should not write dystopian plausible fiction, because then I would recommend they don't, because they are making that more likely, I think. Now, you may find my plausible fiction dystopian, but if I'm writing it, I should not find my own dystopian. Otherwise, it would be a bad idea to do it. We propose a mathematical account of how it might work, and then this is all work in progress. It has lots of gaps. It might not even be good. So the last question, I have this sense that it might not be ethical to do plausible fiction sometimes, and that's the last thing we'll talk about. Okay, so steps towards math. This, again, is plausible fiction. I don't know if this will work, but I want to talk about Petri net. So a Petri net consists of two types of things. Some people call them species or places, but I think of them as resources and transitions. So a Petri net, a transition has two sides, the input side and the output side. So here's a transition that takes the resource of eggs and creates the two resources of an egg yolk and an egg white, and that's a transition called separate egg. And a Petri net is just your big bunch of resources you're going to talk about and your big bunch of transitions that you know about, like turning methane into carbon dioxide. A Petri net may include many different resources and transitions. I already said that. The resources are usually drawn as circles, but I just draw them as wires. It makes the diagram a lot less cluttered. And so this is an execution of a Petri net. So it involves 11 resources: crust, butter, sugar, egg, yolk, white, butter, meringue, lemon pie, and unbaked pie, and 5 transitions: separate egg, make filling, make meringue, fill crust, and add meringue. And in category theory, a Petri net is just a signature for a symmetric monoidal category. So Ty talked about symmetric monoidal categories as what enriches enriched categories. And so the kind of free symmetric monoidal categories are the Petri nets. So Petri nets in category theory are just free symmetric monoidal categories. And so the executions are the morphisms in this symmetric monoidal category. This says that make lemon filling is a morphism that takes butter, sugar, and yolk and outputs lemon filling, whereas this whole box is a morphism that takes crust, butter, sugar, egg, and butter again, and makes unbaked pie. So imagine each wiring diagram as plausible fiction and each box as a gap. So the gap here is that I've got these in the world I have today, and I want to make unbaked pie, and then maybe I could put it in an oven later as the next step. But the gap here is prepare pie, and it's plausible that I can do that. I feel like, yeah, I could probably do that. And then the wiring diagram is plausible fiction for how to do that. It says, well, to do that, I'm going to separate the egg and make filling and make crust and add meringue. But it's still, there's plenty of gaps. Like, do I actually know how to make lemon filling? I don't know how to make lemon filling. So collaborators can help me fill those gaps by saying, oh, I know how to make lemon filling. You do this, 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 this. And eventually it goes down to like, oh, how do you separate an egg? Well, I move my arm to the right. And it's like, well, how do you move your arm? Oh, well, I send signals down my arm or whatever from my brain. So eventually you might not even know how you're filling those gaps, but then you can just do them because you have mastery over moving your arm. So there's a kind of recursive nature to gap filling. You can recursively dive down into this plausible fiction and just arrange many boxes inside of a box. And sometimes a box might just be kind of just filled with no boxes inside. But all of this is just syntax. Nothing means anything yet. Make lemon filling doesn't mean anything. It's just a box that someone thinks is plausible. This is all just syntax, and these are what are called operads, so like things in a thing. We're showing the operad for symmetric monodal categories, and maybe, I'm guessing plausible fiction is more general than just symmetric monodal categories, so it involved a different operad. I think it'll still be operadic. It'll still be something like this. An operad algebra is a syntax for gap filling. It says that, so an operad says that a gap might be filled by an arrangement F of other gaps. Like this thing would be an F. It'd be a function kind of thing, a morphism that takes many things, takes many gaps and puts them together in this pattern with all these wires to form this gap or to fill this gap. So now just pure wiring can fill gaps, but the rest is know-how. So Alice knows how to fill the separate egg gap. So an operad functor is a map from M to set, which M from O to set, which Tai Dene was also talking about. Those are called O algebras or functors from O to set or Kopri-Sheaves. But in this case, these are operads are a little bit different than her setting. But anyway, the very same kind of formula. So M of G, M of a gap, tells us the set of things that can fill the gap. G is a object here and is sent to a set, the set that can fill the gap, the set of all ways to separate egg. Okay, M of separate egg is the set of all ways to separate egg. Now, given any arrangement, F, the algebra must provide a formula that says, if I know how to fill this gap, this gap, this gap, this gap, and this gap, then this wiring diagram tells me how to fill this gap. So it takes any morphism of gaps in a gap or wiring diagram of boxes in a box and says, if you know a way to fill in each of these boxes, I will produce for you a way of filling in the big box. Namely, follow this recipe. So it's all kind of about recipes. And there might be other sorts of fillers too. We could enrich not just in sets, but we can enrich in time. So this thing, if things in parallel can be done at the same time, this whole thing would take 22 minutes, 2 plus 15 plus 2 plus 3. But now you can, instead of that, you could enrich in plausibility. Maybe the plausibility that I know how to separate egg is 0.73, and the plausibility that I know how to make lemon meringue is 0.4 or whatever, and you could kind of combine how plausible this fiction is by how plausible the pieces are. So you can enrich in lots of different things like probabilities or sets or whatever you want. Okay, so so here's a possible way of thinking about plausible fiction, namely that operads may serve as the mathematical foundation for gap filling. And that would give a crystallized accounting system for plausible fiction. And then from there, I think it'd be relatively easy to make a software platform. For example, you could just type in or talk about plausible fiction about what you wanted the country to look at, or what you wanted your neighborhood to look at, or what you wanted your pie to look like. And then an LLM could convert that into a Petri net, or whatever is appropriate if it's not Petri nets. And then collaborators, maybe it would take that Petri net and kind of rewrite the plausible fiction that you originally wrote, but do it so that when you click a box, it shows you some contiguous text. And so people could get the sense, oh, I see, this box is about this text here. And then they could like open the box and fill it with their own plausible fiction. So collaborators could fill any box with more plausible fiction or just do it, like separate the egg. And I can think of this as like a conjecture proving or job completion TaskRabbit platform. So maybe LLMs could be trained to factor jobs into simpler ones, and robots and humans could work together to get things done. So you would say, I need a deck on my house, and here's some money for it. And then maybe somebody could say, well, if I can get someone to do this and I can get someone to do that, then we can get that done. So now the question is, would that actually help humanity actualize potential? So the lightning bolt or river crossing analogy is this image here that we make X more likely. So don't do a dystopian thing, because if you make X more likely by offering a mimetically fit proposal for how to do it. If I show you a proposal for how to make something bad happen and it's mimetically fit, and everyone starts to learn about this great way of like people on the internet sometimes do this, then I think you make it more likely it'll happen. And then what you could do is you could work on what you like with who you like to work well with. But could this be abused? And does it lead to a good future in your estimation as audience? And can we make this into a good future? That's the next topic. So ethics is a study of what we ought to do. But to me, ought is a care word. So ought points to what we care most deeply about, what matters most. And the deep cares are those that we keep even as surface cares change. So there's a time when I'm like really wanting a donut, and I really care about that donut. But as soon as I'm done eating the donut, I'm not tasting it anymore, and I kind of wish I hadn't had the donut. And so that's not a sustainable care. It's a care, but it goes away. And Mike Tyson also cared about beating others, but after prison, he's kind of softened that care of like beating. So if care isn't sustainable, his care wasn't sustainable, right? So the cares to end slavery and decrease infant mortality, I think those are sustaining cares. They might not be. Maybe we don't actually care about ending slavery, and we'll just go back to slavery pretty soon. But I think that that those are sustaining cares. And that persistent problems in the world, bad actors, inefficiencies where someone is kind of harming something, that those things attract attention and eventually get worked out. That you might not believe that, but I think that in this story of the ecosystem as caring about actualizing potential, that it finds places where the potential could be better actualized and tries to find them, and tries to reduce the inefficiencies. So I'm proposing that maybe sustainable care might be a definition of good. So if you can sustain a care, then it means that it's fitting with the world dynamics. And if you can't, it's because there's something wrong with it where it's not working well for something you're not taking into account. And so I think it's good to work on, the main idea is that it's good to work on things you can sustainably care about. And so it's worthwhile to figure out what those sustainable cares are. What can we care about now that we'll still care about in 100 years? And I think plausible fiction might be able to help us envision transitions to sustainable practices where we say, we care about this now, but it's not actually good for us. It's not going to work long term. And that we might be able to accelerate how we phase out unsustainable practices. So karma is this Indian word, or Hindu word, I think, but it means something like the law of cause and effect, but I don't mean anything magical or mystical. It's just that what goes around comes around, and it doesn't always work. It's not always true. But I call these processes of what goes around coming around karmic loops, and they occur as the ecosystem processes and entities' net contributions. So when we decide whether Donald Trump was a good guy or bad guy as an ecosystem, when that is decided, then he will be in whatever position he is in at that point. So I believe that the karmic loops are getting shorter, and we're more and more able to speed up how fast we share and explain what's going on in the world. And even though there are some glitches like flat Earth, where people are like trying to do science themselves and not really sure how to do it, and they're not very good at it necessarily, I think that is a phase that we're in, but that we're going to like get better and better at making sense of each other, and that what goes around may come around faster. And so I also propose self-cannibalism as a mental image of unsustainable care. So cannibalism is taboo, you shouldn't eat other people, but eating your own flesh is just self-evidently bad, like no one just actually takes a bite out of their own arm. And so people do, like this Emperor Nero did self-cannibalize in the sense that he was overly self-indulgent. He killed his own mother for power, he did all sorts of things. He destroyed his own support system, and it didn't end well for him. And cancer killed its host, and human traffickers are humans, literally trafficking humans, but they don't see it as self-cannibalism, they see it as other. And so I think what's going to happen as the karmic loops become shorter, the human traffickers may notice what they're doing more quickly, and then that they'll maybe stop, and they'll realize that they're like pretty much eating their own flesh.
Where would you put autophagy?
Yeah, autophagy is something that people, right, you try not to do that, right? You try, but that's a bad thing.
But autophagy is a very good thing.
Let's talk about it. I think I don't know the term.
Autophagy is your cells actually consuming misshapen proteins inside of themselves as a way to actually get energetic resources rather than getting it from outside. Autophagy is more bigger than that. You have things like apoptosis, where you cause something to kill itself, and that's how you stop cancer.
Cool. Yeah. I think that should fit with this general theory, but I think you're right. They're not literally eating themselves, they're eating what's bad inside of them, what's hurting them inside of them.
Pretty close. And apoptosis is I tell you, kill yourself, and you do it, and it's a good thing because you are part of a cancer.
Right. So whether that fits or does not fit with this theory would be worth talking about. But I think it's okay, but we can talk about it. So recently, an AI meets robotics company offered me a grant, and I felt really unsure about it from an ethics point of view, and I talked to a lot of people. And in the end, I used this plausible fiction framework. I asked the two people from the company I was talking to, I posed the question, if we're very successful and we make robots brilliant, can you imagine a good future that includes that? And one said, my go-to is a Wall-E world where robots help us scavenge for materials and food. And I said, well, that doesn't seem like a very good world overall, so that I'm going to count that as a no. And then the other one said, well, I'm sure robots will help us in a lot of different ways. And I said, yeah, I agree, but do you imagine that the whole world would be better if we had brilliant robots overall? And she didn't answer, and neither did the other guy. So I didn't think that, when I couldn't imagine a better future when we had brilliant robots, so I didn't take the grant. And so I think it's just a kind of very basic ethical litmus test. If I'm successful at the thing I'm doing, at this thing, is it easier for me to imagine good futures or bad futures? And I think it's surprising. I had not heard of this ethical litmus test, but I think it's like a pretty easy one that doesn't involve a lot of theory. So if your overall futures are worse, if overall futures would be worse for yourself, your family, your community, your world by doing P, then doing P is selling out. It's disloyal, it's unethical, it's self-cannibalizing. So I don't have much time. Judith Butler said that morality itself is giving an account of oneself. So we rehearse our plans for accounting for our actions using inner dialogue. And basically, we're constantly going through this. If someone asked me why I did X, here's what I would say. But to her, giving an account of ourselves is our morality. And so I think we need to account for our own sake, because not only is it our morality, but it's also empowering for us. It helps us decide on all these things. So if we want to make plans or carry them out, they all require communication. And if we want to work with others, we have to account for our actions so that they know who we are, so that they know whether we're good to work with on a project. So at a DNA level, genes decide what proteins an organism can produce. Again, that's just language accounting for what we can do. So in a lot of different cases, language is just a way of creating what you want. And I'm wondering whether if we made a platform like that helped us build decks by having LLMs and robots constructing whatever we care about by factoring it, would it be a good thing? We could use it to maybe kill all the mosquitoes, which people have tried to tell me is a great thing to do. That one really is good. And if we had plausible fiction, if we had a platform, I don't know whether it would lead to a good future. But the last thing I want to do, it'd be great to autophage, but it would not be good to self-cannibalize. So in summary, I think that it can help us move towards better futures, but it can help us move towards whatever future someone constructs, whether we think it's better or not. As a summary, it starts now, it ends well in the estimation of the author. It's plausible and it's mimetically fit, and you collaborate by filling gaps with action or more plausible fiction. It care to actualize the potential by tending to it, by being there in a listening way. It has actively, I think it's actively maintained since the origin of life, if you consider it to just be this tending. And that carers like us, we mine the world for potential. Our algorithm has so much potential. We lift it out into the light of actuality. And so math provides systematic accounts and leads to potential actualization. We can work together on this project by, I'll make the programming language, you make the program, and then we'll get this thing accomplished. And so whether you're making banks or rockets or computers, you need mathematics. And the category theory, for example, operads may help us formalize the plausible fiction idea. So ethics is sustainable care. I think that aligns with lasting good outcomes. I can continue caring about this beyond the end of the donut. And unsustainable care self-cannibalizes and reduces future potential. So I think we need to put care back into this story. Like we've been talking a lot about intelligence, but I think care is very important, and that we need to seek sustainable care and collaborate on better, enduring futures. So thanks.